Thank you, John. Thank you. Okay, John walked in to tell us the sound was fine. Thank you, John. Okay, so that's why, so if listing period exceeds 24 months on a residential one apartment property, disagreement is made unless sellers of corporation LLC are partnership. So obviously they're gearing this more towards the individual. And then section A2, the listing price, what are we gonna sell it for? So that should be self-explanatory, then property specific, yeah.
Real quick, let's say the same scenario. The kids, the parents died, the house is enlisted.
Mhm.
The kids say, I don't want to sell it yet.
Well, the listing contract indicates that if a seller prevents you from selling, theoretically, you're entitled to compensation. So that contract would be binding on them. So if they try to prevent you from selling it, the contract may be enforceable in terms of collecting those commissions if they force you to take, if they refuse to do anything to sell it.
So Richard, it said it's void unless seller is in corporation or.
Yeah.
So even if a trust, there is a trust.
No, a trust is going to be subject to the same 24 months.
Really?
Yes, yeah.
Interesting.
If it's a traditional family revocable trust, yes. Because they look at the trust, the grantor of the trust is the individual, so that's why they're looking at the trust as being that of the individual property. I'm surprised that they're including an LLC because typically most LLCs don't have corporate members. Usually they're individuals. It's still a partnership, but that's what they've chosen. And then property specific listings, we can say manufactured mobile home. We want, it's kind of rare we list mobile homes, probate, conservatorship, or guardianship. And the reason that's there, if you do have a probate sale, there's going to be an additional addendum that will attach to the listing contract. And a probate listing contract, for example, cannot exceed 90 days. You can extend it for an additional 90 days, and there could be additional extensions. But that's one of the restrictions associated with a probate listing. So we're not here to talk about probates today. And then, of course, in red prints, big bold print. Now, it's not going to be red, only black, but commissions are negotiable, right? And then when you print this out or have somebody sign this, the broker commission advisory BCA is going to be attached, and it's nothing but an advisory, just requires a signature. So section C1 4B compensation seller's broker. So this is how much you're charging. And remember, right now, even though it's not illegal, these forms no longer accommodate asking the seller to pay commission to the buyer's broker. They remove those fields completely. So the only percentage of the commission we're talking about at this point in time is going to be what we as the listing agents are going to earn. So it can be a percentage or it can be a fixed dollar amount. Or you can even, when it says it's attached compensation schedule, maybe you negotiate an incentive. If I sell for $1 million, I get 2%. If I sell for $1.5 million, I get 2.5%. So you do things like that. That's not anything that's a violation. So and then section C2, additional compensation to sellers, broker, and buyers is unrepresented. So in the event that a buyer approaches the seller or the listing agent and says, I'm not represented, nor do I want to be represented, perhaps you as the listing agent with the seller had already negotiated that the seller is going to pay you an additional 2% for providing the additional services to a buyer who is not represented. So that's the purpose of this paragraph. If there's a buyer who's unrepresented and the seller agreed in this listing contract to pay you as the listing agent additional money for providing all the work or doing all the work, that's the amount of money we can place in here. So it's not money that is available to a broker that brings the buyer. It's only for the listing agent themselves.
And what should be there? How much?
Well, that's a good question. I think, you know what? Do sellers really believe that you're doing any additional work if you're representing both parties? There is a lot more work. There's no question about that. So what can you put in there? You can put anything that you want. 1 to 3%.
Additional.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And then if you were to find a buyer who refuses representation, yet wants to submit an offer, we would have a buyer non-agency agreement signed. And it puts them on notification, we have no fiduciary relationship, even though we may be providing the forms to make this transaction happen, including the purchase contract. We may be drafting all those documents, but we're not representing them. And we have no fiduciary obligations. So that theoretically would mean they should be scheduling their inspections, so on and so forth. It's kind of a rarity, I think, in regards to buyers insisting upon that.
Yeah, you still have to show them the property, let them in for the inspection, let them in for, for.
Yeah, but what with the buyer non-agency agreement, you're telling them, I'm not doing anything, I'm just letting you in, right? So you still have to do all those things, right? And you're gonna be writing up the purchase contract. In a sense, you're almost representing that buyer without the fiduciary obligation.
They still have to fill out all those forms.
Yes, they do, but you know who's gonna be doing that? It's gonna be the listing agent, right? Because the buyers are not going to know how to do that. C3, continuation of right to compensation for broker identified prospective buyers. So in the event my listing contract expires or we agree to cancel the listing contract, I have the opportunity within 5 days following that termination date to provide a list of the buyers that came through the property. And with that said, if I fail to fill section C3 to the right out, I'm not entitled for any protection because if any of those buyers come back and buy that property, if I were to say that the continuation period shall be 90 calendar days and the buyer makes an offer or someone related to the buyer makes an offer, I'm entitled to compensation for the sale of that property. So that's why we want a continuation period in there. Leave it blank, you have no protection following the termination of the listing agreement.
And what is reasonable? You said 5 days?
90 to 180 days, I would say.
How do you find out that they came back and bought the house?
You watch and see who's sold.
Yes.
Actually, we can, if you think there's an issue, we can pull up title, we can make a determination you bought that property.
So you have to keep an eye out.
Yes, they're not gonna come and tell themselves. Unfortunately,
So legally 90 to.
there's no limitation.
No limitation.
Yes. I probably would make it 180 days is reasonable. I could make it 5 years. I would think you've got in front of a judge and probably say. They have so much leeway in regards to dictating what takes place. So yeah, I usually see 90 to 180 days. And then seller obligations to pay previous brokers. If in the event it was listed and maybe that prior broker submitted the list of buyers that went through the house, the seller has an obligation to notify. Because if that buyer that saw the property previously and was listed with the prior broker buys the property and they haven't told you, then that prior broker together with you would be entitled to compensation. So I think you should ask them if you knew it was listed and it's expired or it's been canceled. Okay, did your other broker give you a list of names of buyers that came to the property? Let's not put ourselves in a position that we can't defend.
Rich, how many days does the agent have to give the seller that list?
5 days after termination. So whether it's canceled or expired,
So they don't provide a list, they're not entitled.
they're not entitled to any protection, correct? And then items intended to be included and excluded. So included items, maybe they want to get rid of their washer and dryer. Excluded items, maybe they want to keep the washer and dryer. So this isn't terribly critical. But leased items, this is something that should be triggering them because a lot of people don't realize you should be asking if they're solar, if it's leased or purchased. We had another disclosure that we would ask them to sign after the fact. But when you're sitting in front of somebody, if you're trying to get them to sign the listing contract, don't beat them to death with asking for additional information. Let's just get through it, right? And we come back after the fact. Liened items, well, we talked about leased items could be solar. Liened items could be solar. A liened item, the difference would be it's something that they're purchasing as opposed to leasing. Smart home features. That's really not a big deal. For the rest of the thing, this one, section E, when property will be marketed in the following MLS. So with this example, our MLS is CRMLS. You should be filling that in. And then if you look to the right, we see form MLSA, and let me pull that up. And this is going to be a part of the residential listing agreement packet. Just like when you look at the purchase contract, it has disclosures, agency disclosure, wire fraud disclosure, so all these different documents that are going to accompany it. This is also going to be accompanying the listing contract, and I wanted to take you through that. So some of this should be pre-populated because on the listing contract, you already specified who the seller and the brokers are, correct? Tells them what an MLS is. It tells them section 2 about the benefits of using an MLS. And I personally always think there's a benefit to seller. Something that's very, very important, the section 3, public marketing of property, the clear cooperation policy. Now, this is something you're going to be tested on today. The clear cooperation policy, first of all, mandates that within 1 business day of marketing a property, you must put it on the MLS. So you can take a listing contract, for example, that says the beginning date is today. That means no matter who sells the property, I'm entitled to compensation, but perhaps the marketing date is going to be August 1st because they have to prepare the property for sale. So August 1st, we're going to specify those different dates in the listing contract. The marketing date is different possibly than the beginning date of the listing contract itself. And if we have a start marketing date that is later than the beginning date of the contract, we have an obligation to register that with a multiple listing service. Failure to do so could result in a $1,500 fine. We don't want to do that. So public marketing, first of all, no matter who markets that property, this is the way I would tell someone, within 1 business day of marketing that property, you must put it on the MLS. If a seller decides to share that information with somebody, it could cause you a problem. Public marketing is defined as follows. It's any distribution, marketing, signage to anyone outside of the broker's license that you're associated with. You can distribute that information to anyone associated with the same broker's license that you're affiliated with. And if you have signed agency disclosure with a buyer, you could introduce the property and that would not be deemed to be public marketing. Other than that, everything is public marketing. And so now, D, seller instructs broker. You can see the default is seller instructs broker to market the property to the public at the beginning of the listing period. So when we go back to the listing contract, right now, section A1, the listing period, that's actually the beginning. So we're going to make an assumption today is the beginning. However, in section D2, we're going to check that box because we're not going to start marketing this property until August 1st. And seller instructs broker to begin marketing the property to the public on August 1st. So this will fulfill the requirement associated with the MLS. First of all, we're not going to start marketing till a later date. Now, what if you don't know when it's going to be prepared for sale? You know, we said August 1st, but there's a lot of work. So realistically, before August 1st, in my example, if we're not going to start marketing that property till September 1st, you have to get a written instruction from your seller to extend this aspect of the listing contract. And why is that important? Because if you don't get something signed as of the day or before, and the MLS asks you for the documentation, if you don't have documentation, anything, email that states the seller's instruction to extend the start marketing date, it's a $500 fine. Crazy. And then, yeah, that's okay.
If you put it on the MLS, the only people that see it are the MLS representatives, nobody from the public gets to see it.
No, if you put it on the MLS, but if you register the property, that is not distributed to the public and nobody sees that information.
Okay, so just registering.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. And then D3, just so you're aware, if the seller looks at this, it says, and they want, say they don't want to market the property, doesn't matter. If you check that box and it's marketed within 1 day of marketing the property, you have an obligation to put on the MLS. And then F, clear cooperation policy does not apply. The clear cooperation policy is everything I've talked about. If you start marketing a property I've listed within 1 day, you must put it on the MLS. And that means the clear cooperation policy in our case does apply. So do not check that box. And I'm going to just skip over this. There's no sections 4C2. There's no reason to check that box. Why wouldn't we want this to be distributed to everywhere on the MLS? So we want that, right? And then also, people sometimes are concerned about others taking pictures of their property. If the seller is concerned about that, we can check section 6B2. Seller instructs broker to publish on the MLS that taking of images is limited to those persons preparing appraisal or inspection reports. So within the private remarks, we would make a notation that you're not to take any photographs of the property.
So are you referring to the people that they come and see
Yes,
their property,
yeah.
so they cannot take it?
They're not supposed to, but how do you enforce that? And that's what you tell, how can I enforce that?
Yeah.
But it's just something if maybe, and you have to qualify what this is. I'm not gonna be sitting there, or have a ring camera looking for people who are taking pictures.
And also, after you do have your listing, who should remove the pictures? Buyer agent should request the seller agent to remove the pictures of the property.
Well, personally, there's two things. Why do agents remove the pictures? You can do that before the listing is closed out, all but one.
Yeah, but
So that-
after,
You cannot, once that listing is closed out, you cannot make any changes whatsoever.
I think, isn't it owner, Richard? Usually owner do this stuff, like in the
The
picture.
seller.
The seller
Yeah.
usually,
The buyer,
they may request that sometimes. I personally, when I'm looking for comps, this is selfishly why I want those pictures there. I can't tell how to comp a property out sometimes without looking at that house. So that's the reason to do it. But here's why many times sellers sometimes don't want the pictures on there. Maybe, and buyers many times don't want them on there. So you can do it. But a lot of times I see this pattern with certain agents. They intentionally remove all the pictures because they don't want you having the same advantage they have in that farm area. They have more information than you do. Rachel Schwartz from Global Banker Realty. I see it all the time, guys.
but for instance, when I got my house, it's still the pictures are there and I don't feel comfortable.
Well,
So,
once that listing's closed out, the
yeah,
MLS will
and I
not be.
reached out to the agent
It's too late.
and said she cannot do
She
anything.
can't.
She said you should have requested before, but how should I know even to request it, At that time, I wasn't
When the business
agent.
goes.
Well, that's a good question. There's no training or policy that says you better request some of those pictures.
But it is on the website, there is a way to, actually, I done it me and Carlos once.
No, it's Zillow, that's
It's
different.
Zillow, yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
still,
Zillow.
The MLS.
sometimes it take in
Yeah,
for all,
yeah.
so.
But yeah, the MLS, there's nothing you can do. So,
But on Zero, I can't.
possible.
Yeah,
I think you can contact Zillow as the homeowner and ask them to remove that.
you can add and move, I don't know.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
possibly Zillow,
Yeah.
but yeah, not the MLS, unfortunately. And then, let's see, section F, fund presentation of offer as well. The default is. Let's skip something. All right, so section E2, seller instructs broker not to take or use photographs of marketing except as required by MLS rules. The MLS rules require at least one substantial outward picture of the property to be published. I can't imagine why anybody, at least during the listing period, wouldn't want pictures on there because that's what's going to sell the property. Time your presentation of offers, the default is I'm going to present the offers as soon as practical. I can't imagine changing that. Buyer supplemental offer letters. This is stating that the seller instructs us to not present any warm or heartfelt letters. I prefer that you don't obtain letters, because discrimination is wild with things like that. Don't ask for pictures, don't ask for anything. Especially. Yeah, don't let that go out. And then investigation reports, the default is the national hazard disclosure. This can be used if the seller wishes to have other reports ordered in advance of listing the property or during the listing period to provide to a self-viable liability. And then exceptions to ownership title. Well, maybe this requires a signature of 4 people, and there's only 3 people available. In that case, if all 4 people are required to sign, if you get the signature of the 3, you still have a valid listing contract, at least in my example, for 75% of the listing. And more importantly, once you put that on the MLS, no other agent can then publish this listing on the MLS concurrently. So you control the MLS, which is very important.
But it just can't sell without all 4 signatures.
Correct.
You can
It's
list it,
not
but
going
just
to
not
sell
sell.
at all. Signatures.
So excuse me, about the letter,
Mhm.
if we don't check mark any of those, okay?
Yeah.
So, is the agent has to accept the buyer's letter?
No, this is saying the seller instructs broker not to present buyer letters to the seller.
Yeah, but if it didn't check mark.
That's the point. You don't have to check it. It's telling you, do not present letters.
That's the
Oh,
Period.
default. If you check the box.
If you check the box, then the seller's saying they want to see the letters.
Oh, okay.
Item G.
Yes.
Sorry, item G. Why would you want to list it if you can't find the 4th person?
Hey, first of all, you want to get that listing tied up as a listing agent.
Okay.
And then eventually, it's not that they can't find them. Somebody may be adverse to selling the property. So there can be disputes among the various beneficiaries. That's usually what would be the case.
A friend of mine was part owner of a house, 4 kids. They found 2, the other 2
I couldn't find them.
can't locate. the other
Yeah,
two.
you can't get title insurance and it's gonna have to get title action. To get control of the property, unfortunately. Yeah, that would be difficult and time consuming. So the most extreme example we had 8 people that had to sign and nobody would grant authority to anyone. Well, all 8 people had to sign.
They all live
That's
together.
what the grants do, yeah. This poor agent, it was one of his first transactions. And then, let's see, H, seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property as part of any transaction. So let's say the seller is concerned about finding replacement property and they want to make the sale of their property contingent upon finding that replacement property. We would check that box and that addendum would be added. And then seller opt-outs, maybe they don't want a key safe lockbox in their property. It seems to be somewhat common, as a matter of fact. I think if you can, you want a seller to make that house as accessible as possible to anybody. And you can control the hours also, and somebody may have to contact you for an additional code to get in. Additional terms, whatever that may be. And then this is the detail that explains the contract itself, and there might be a couple of things I just want to touch upon before we ask you to complete a listing contract. And of course, it tells us when we're entitled to compensation. And the question earlier was, well, what if the beneficiary is associated with the decedent refused to sell the property? Well, if they prevent the sale, it's noted in here that we're probably entitled to our compensation. And then just as seller compensation, seller saying I haven't signed one of those agreements. And then also seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker. Maximum listing period, we talked about that, items included, excluded. Leased or not owned items, seller representation. Presentation of offers, these are all things that we talked about, I would say. The buyer supplemental offer letters, the buyer letters. More detail on that. And it talks about possible dual agency, right? We can be representing multiple sellers of the same type of property. Photographs, key safe lockbox, you almost through it. Mediation, if there's a dispute, the parties are required to mediate initially. And we're almost done. Okay, so what we've given you, everyone is at least here, is a copy of the listing contract. And also, we're gonna give you this. This added to that regard, so what we're gonna go through, just ask questions as we go. This is not related. But sometimes I'd say, no, that's all. Did I give you? Yeah, that's page 2. If there's concern, here's a bullet. Please. Well, so, yeah, so, no, I didn't give you that, sorry.
I just gave you guys a page that has the listing agreement, the owner, the property owner's name, that we're gonna use as an example. So, let me pause the recording now so that it doesn't just drag.